Hi, this is Edward Funk and podcast number 36. Now, titled this one, Loretta Young and I face a moment of truth about my sexuality, sort of. Okay. In my last podcast, I had lots to say about a fundraiser at the Museum of Radio and TV held at the Waldorf Astoria in New York. Now, when it came time for Loretta's presentation, she was letter perfect and appeared to be well received. However, I heard a slight slurring with words that began with S. It reminded me of watching her much acclaimed TV movie Christmas Eve, which she had made 26 years after leaving series television. This was 3 years before I met Loretta, and at the time I wondered, is false teeth responsible for this? That night in New York, I knew she didn't wear false teeth. And I concluded it must have been caused by stress. And then I discovered later that she'd fallen by her reflective pool years earlier, knocking out her front tooth. A dentist was able to insert it, but the slurring with the S words now became evidence when she was under stress. As we were leaving the ballroom that night, a producer from ABC's Good Morning America approached Loretta and asked if she'd be interested serving as a guest host. Loretta said, "Oh, no, dear. I'm never up at that hour." That was her glib reply. And then Robert Osborne of Turner Classic Movie fame approached Loretta to tell her how much he had always admired her. Loretta thanked him, but we never broke stride. When we were reaching the ground level and we were walking into the street, a photographer asked Loretta to stop so that he could take her picture. She responded, "You'll have to get it on the run." And I suspected she had uttered that sentence countless times over the years. After being delivered to the hotel by limousine, Loretta invited me up to her suite for a nightcap, as she needed to unwind. I went to my room to change and gave her a few more minutes to get out of her evening clothes before we headed up. After a few minutes, the conversation returned to her telling me that she had agreed to participate in this evening because she thought I'd enjoy it. I told her that I had, and I thanked her. Then she asked me about my love life. Had there ever been a serious relationship? I told her that there had been, but that it ended badly. She asked me, "Well, when did this happen?" And I said, I really don't like talking about this. It was an abrupt answer, but it put an end to a situation which was very uncomfortable for me. Loretta didn't seem offended. Rather, she displayed a "that's that" attitude, and the subject was changed. The discussion, or should I say non-discussion, about my love life was a turning point in my relationship with Loretta. I think from that point on, she knew or suspected I was gay. Whenever the subject of homosexuality came up, I always argued that it wasn't a choice, that even the Catholic Church teachings concurred. Loretta wasn't buying it. I knew her opinion well. She had previously stated, homosexuality is something when someone becomes bored with straight sex and they just want something kinkier. I didn't have the courage to out myself. Keep in mind, this was over 30 years ago, and I was afraid that it would jeopardize the opportunity to write our book. Instead, without words being spoken, I think that Loretta and I instituted the "don't ask, don't tell" policy that President Clinton introduced a year later into the military. I don't think speechless communication was anything new to Loretta. My impression was that the unspoken had been her mother's modus operandi, And I think Loretta chose the same avenue over confrontation. Now, the next morning, my brother Kevin and his wife Laura and their two older daughters arrived from their home in Weston, Connecticut. I can still see little Katie, with Loretta's encouragement, running throughout her suite wearing that blue satin cape that John Louis had designed for the previous night's event. Later, Loretta and I went to Mass at St. Patrick's, during which a fan pushed herself into our pew to chat with Loretta. After that, we joined a gentleman at the Museum of Radio and Television at the restaurant 21, which I always think of from the movie Dial In for Murder. Anyway, as we walked in, Loretta greeted the maitre d' saying, "Hello, Paul." He must have been there a long time. It had been since the 60s that Loretta had maintained an apartment in New York. That night, we were guests of a real estate magnate whose name I don't remember. He invited us to join his party at Le Cirque. We were at a large table, and Loretta was out of earshot from where I was sitting. I was glad. The two women on each side of me were having a conversation about Leona Hensry, known as the Queen of Mean, who once stated, "Only little people pay taxes," and how she had snagged Harry Hemsley away from his former wife by giving him blowjobs under his desk. Loretta had once opined that I was a bigger prude than she was, and she may have been right. Another time, I accompanied Loretta on a trip to Chicago, and we were staying at the Drake Hotel. My cousin's son Jason stopped by to visit. He had called from the lobby before coming up, and I opened the door to the suite so that it would be easy for him to find. In the interim, I noticed a man in his 50s taking a quick look in and then proceeded down the hall. A few minutes later, after Jason arrived, a bellman knocked on the door with a note for Loretta. It was from that man down the hall, and he wanted to hook up with Loretta. She was incensed. "How dare he? Who does he think he is?" And so forth. She wanted to call the desk and complain about the bellman who delivered the note. I talked her out of that. He seemed like a hapless kind of guy, frumpish in appearance, and probably easily intimidated. Jason and I talked about it later in the night. Loretta was in her late 70s, and guys were still hitting on her. That impressed Jason. And Loretta had been equally impressed with Jason. After he left, she gasped, "Oh, he's more handsome than Tyrone," meaning Tyrone Power, who she had made 5 movies with and whom she had fallen in love. The next day, my older sister Evelyn hosted Loretta for a tea at her condominium. When we entered their door, Evelyn and husband Sidney were there to greet us. I noticed that Evelyn's hair was wet. I found out later that between the time we were spotted getting out of the car at the curb and arriving at their door on the 3rd floor, Evelyn had jumped in and out of the shower and dressed. Now she was running behind schedule because at the last minute she had decided to purchase new dishes. Now, a postscript to this story. Once Loretta and I had returned to Los Angeles, I realized that she had packed a dress specifically for Evelyn's tea. Loretta always plotted her wardrobe selection strategically, and that she included something just to meet members of my family struck me really as very sweet. Now, a footnote here. Loretta did meet all my siblings and a few of my cousins, but I held it to my family. Many, many people asked me to introduce them to Loretta, and I always refused. After 60 years in the public eye, she was very selective about who she wanted to spend time with. So, thank you.